Offset filed an amended divorce response in his ongoing case against Cardi B. He is now asking for spousal support.
So spousal support is determined based on a number of factors. How much are the married people making? What is their life like, living together? Are they both employed? And so what they do is they take the one that's making the most, the supporting spouse, and they determine, how much that person is making, if they're going to be living in a different area, different place, employment, duration of the marriage. And then they look at the receiving spouse, the one that would be receiving the spousal support, to see if that person is working or not, stay-at-home mother or father, how long they've been together, the prospects for future employment. There's a whole bunch of factors that go into it, based on the economics of each spouse, upon divorce. Having children can be a factor in spousal support as it affects, additional, debt for the different spouses, if they're going to be taking care of the children. But there is a separate analysis for child support, because that is specifically for the needs of the child, and arises really independently from divorce. There's a situation where there could be some offsets between spousal support and child custody support. Child custody is based on the arrangements of the child. Which spouse are they living with? If a child is living with one spouse more than the other, then the supporting spouse would be entitled to more child custody support. So it kind of depends with the children, who are they living with, and then there's an objective mathematical criteria that kind of goes into that. With spousal support, it's more a little bit more subjective in the sense that it's the lifestyle of living that the receiving spouse has had. When they divorce, the receiving spouse is entitled to a similar type of living that he or she had with the supporting spouse. And so they're going to go into that type of criteria. So it's a little bit different in terms of the factors when determining child support versus custody support. What a judge looks at when trying to decide who's entitled to spousal support is he takes each spouse and determines, the relative economic status of each spouse, how much each spouse is making, are they currently employed, what's their estate like, what are their assets like, and if one is making more than the other, and the divorce will affect the lifestyle of the other spouse, then comes into the considerations of spousal support, because each spouse is entitled to the style of living that they had when they were married. So if one is making a lot more money than the other, then that person would may be entitled to pay spousal support to the other person. But there's going to be offsets in terms of the receiving spouse. Are they working? Are they also contributing? Do they have assets? And if they are doing financially well themselves, that's going to offset whatever spousal support obligation the court will find. If one side is asking for spousal support, the inference is that the other is making more money and is more successful. So in terms of determining the assets and revenue and income generated during the marriage, there is an equitable distribution standard. So they're going to look at all the money that was made during that time, and there's going to be an equitable distribution of that income to each. Now, if either side has received separate income, income that either came through inheritance or some type of separate asset that hasn't been commingled, that will not be determined, or be considered. But anything that's made during the marriage, each side is entitled to an equitable distribution. It does seem that there's not a prenup in place. Now, if there is, that's going to go against the claims and desires for spousal support. But it is possible that down the road, she may use that as a defense. And there'll be limitations based on that prenuptial agreement. What each side had before coming into the marriage is deemed their separate property. So they made that's their own. When you get married, at that point, the clock starts ticking for income that is made while the marriage happens, which then each side is entitled to half. Now, sometimes you'll take a separate property asset, let's say stocks or something like that you had before the marriage. You then come into the marriage, but maybe you use revenues from the stocks to pay a joint house or pay joint bills. Now that's becoming what we call a community property or a joint property asset. And that can now be considered within the equitable distribution. So it can get a little tricky. Each side before they got married, has their separate property that they made. When they get married, now all income that is made while they're married is joint. But sometimes it can come in from a separate property asset and then be transformed into quasi property that needs to be, subject to equitable distribution. Who has custody of the kids will play a role in terms of spousal support, because at that point, if the child is living with one parent more than the other, that's going to be a heavier financial burden on that parent. And thus the needs and the lifestyle will be altered a little bit, and thus spousal support could be affected. So it's one of many factors in determining spousal support.